Hello, folks. This is Bela, and I'm recording this intro solo as Mike is a bit busy wrapping things up for the semester. You know, when Mike and I get together to record a podcast, before we hit the record button, we typically have a conversation about what's going on in our lives and in the world. Basically, two good friends catching up since the last time they spoke. Back in episode 128, Mike and I did an experiment, and we hit the record button as soon as our conversation started, and we decided to include it as part of our regular podcast. We received some great comments from our listeners who said they really enjoyed that episode. We also received a very nice email from John, who suggested we make our pre-podcast conversation part of the podcast. Thank you, John, for your thoughtful email and suggestion. We always enjoy hearing from our listeners. Mike and I discussed John's suggestion, and we decided that we will make separate episodes out of our pre-podcast conversations. That way, when those listeners who are only interested in the unconventional path can easily skip over them. Not sure what we're going to label these episodes, but for now, we're going to call them our pre-podcast discussion. Also, I'm not quite sure how often we will release these episodes, as sometimes our conversations are not really podcast worthy. Well, enough of the introduction. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Uh-oh. Now I can't hear you.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yep. It unfroze.
Okay.
I think when you started recording, it froze. That was it.
It flipped it for a second. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good. How are you?
I am okay. I will be better shortly.
A little busy, huh?
Just a lot going on at once. Nothing bad, but just kind of one of those really a 3-week stretch where literally 8 a.m. till 7 p.m. have had structured stuff going on. And so, which is fine, but not a lot of time just to organize my own thoughts and to do a good job on stuff. And you remember that feeling, right? When you kind of are dealing with everybody else's stuff and you're not taking care of your own stuff so well, that's what it's felt like.
Yeah. I have this emotionally, I have this real threshold of, I don't know what it is, like, my mental to-do list and when it gets above that, my anxiety level goes up in a disproportionate amount to the things that get added to the list. It's amazing. Maybe we all have those somehow inside of us, but I can juggle so many things and that's okay. But when it gets above that, I don't deal with it well. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just that kind of right. You're right. That threshold. And right. And anxiety wise, you're like, it's no big deal. None of this stuff is life or death. It's not, you know what I mean? Right. It's all small things, but right. It's just this discomfort that something's not going to work or you're going to forget. I mean, I was late to class for the first time in 20 years, right? I forgot about an online class. I mean, one of my students called me, which was great, but I literally lost track of time, which never happens to me.
Wow.
Oh.
Well,
because I was working on something else, right? I was trying to get something else done. So
remember, we do this podcast together to relieve tension, not cause it. So it's not a super high priority. So, there's other things that come up. I can do it solo, I being retired, I don't have a lot of things coming up, but, so don't let this add to the pile of anxiety inducing elements. It should just be the opposite. This should be part of the relieving tension causing.
Well, and this worked out. Our timing this week worked out perfect. So it was good yesterday that I took the time to actually, and I only listened to the two. I didn't get to the third one. So I got the first two done. And I figured we can either wing the third one or do it later. But yeah, and then this is the last thing of my week, which is nice, right? So my week is, all the structured stuff is done. I got a couple little cleanup tasks I got to do after we're done. But then I'll call it a week. And then next week is not nearly as bad. So finally kind of I can breathe a little bit and have some time back. So that'll be really nice. So next week is better. I literally blocked out all of next Friday, was able to literally hold everything. The only thing that's on my calendar is for us to do this on the 17th, which will be great as long as that still works for you. And then after that, I've got one more class to teach, and then I'm off to the U.S. if they don't close the borders between now and then. So,
yeah. So let's. What's going on? You guys got a new prime minister? Is that what it's called?
Chancellor.
Chancellor. Excuse me, chancellor.
Yes, but it's so we have a president and a chancellor, and yes, the new chancellor Olaf Scholz took over. I think the day before yesterday, and he is from the Social Democratic Party, which is center left. So it's a little more liberal government than the outgoing one of Merkel, she was the chancellor for 12 years, 3 terms. And it's a coalition government. It's a 3-way coalition government, which is interesting. So this Social Democrat Party, they were in coalition with Merkel's party, the Christian Democratic Union, Christian Social Union, CDU-CSU is their abbreviation. They're center right. So those two were shared power for a while, and Olaf Scholz was actually the finance minister. So the new chancellor was the finance minister under Merkel. And so they work together really closely, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not a big break. And then the Green Party is part of the coalition, so that's really a kind of a big deal here. So the a little farther left than the Social Democrats, and then a very pro-business party, so a little more libertarian, not so big on taxes and but free markets and not so social. So they really had to work together to compromise, to come up with a platform of things that they can agree on, and that was really interesting. So they did that pretty quickly. The cabinet is half men and half women. That was one of Scholz's promises that he made. So that's very uncommon here. Even though we had a woman chancellor, the top echelon has been very much dominated by men. So interesting. So nobody's really expecting huge changes, I think. But there's a lot of challenges, as you know, in the world right now. And we'll see what happens. So it's an interesting week here in Germany from a politics standpoint.
Yeah.
What about there?
Yeah. Not much going on. As we record this on December 10th, the big news is the COVID stuff is still sort of increasing here. Our infection rates in this region in sort of upstate New York are like pushing 10%.
Wow.
Hospitals are having capacity problems due to 2 things. One is the sort of increase in COVID cases, and the second is most of the hospitals here instituted a rule that their workers have to be vaccinated. And so many of the hospitals lost, maybe 10% of their workforce, up to 10% of their workforce. So that's, of course, impacting their ability to staff beds. So those 2 things together are so they just canceled or suspended, I should say, all elective surgeries in like 20 or 30 hospitals in New York State. Because of the increase in COVID. So there seems to be a good spike going on, predominantly the Delta strain, as far as folks can tell. And from what I've been able to garner from the data, it's about 2/3, 1/3 hospitalization. So about 2/3 of the folks in the hospital are non-vaccinated. About 1/3 of them are vaccinated. And that bounces around a little bit just from what I've been able to gather. So that's an interesting data point, right? So clearly the vaccine is losing some of its efficacy. And of course, that's why they told everyone to get boosters, which hopefully people will do. And so, yeah, that's what's going on. So actually the ski season started here. So, last year the ski season was really weird because you had to wear a mask and doing the things that I do as a ski patrolman, the patient interactions we actually separated we had to make a lot of modifications to our treatment rooms to keep patients separated and distanced. And we actually set up a separate treatment room in case someone comes in with COVID or any symptoms, And so it's made our life a little more complicated. And their rule at the ski area is if you're indoors or you're standing in line, you have to wear a mask, regardless of your vaccination status. And when you're riding a lift, or if you can't be more than 6 feet away from someone, you have to wear a mask, even if you're outside riding a lift. So that's sort of a dynamic, and that's how it was last year, and that continues this year. So it's basically like no change from the point of view of operating the ski area, and the things that as emergency responders, first aiders, we do on the slopes. So yeah, so that's what's going on here. Everything else is, we've had a little bit of snow on and off, although tomorrow's supposed to be 50 degrees. So we'll see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You've got this recorded, or do you want me to, I didn't start recording, Bela. Oh, we're recording the Skype, so we're fine.
Yeah, I have it in Skype, so
okay.
We're okay, Mike? Yep.
Okay. Yeah, COVID here is bad also. I just looked at the rates. So in the country, it's not so good. In our local area, we're in a little bubble that's not so bad. The nationwide, there were 61,000 new infections yesterday. 22% of the COVID patients, or the 22% of the intensive care unit patients are COVID, and like there, the intensive care units are full, and the hospitals are full. So it's kind of problematic there. A lot of strain on the system. The incidence rate is 413 per 100,000. And it's starting to go down. Hopefully it peaked, but here in my city in Münster, it's only 139.
Yeah.
So it's about 1/4 or 1/3 of one third of the national average.
I was thinking,
but we moved. Yeah.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
We moved. We moved all our classes again, kind of back to online last week, and they're still doing some classes in person at my university, but the ones like that I teach that don't need a lab or anything like that, we've moved all those to online. Yeah,
we haven't moved any of that stuff online yet. My two grandkids that go to elementary school are still going to in classroom stuff. It's interesting. I was thinking about how the testing dynamic has changed from a year ago to now. In that, year ago there was people being tested every week because of their job, because they weren't vaxxed, et cetera. And now people are, so I wonder how we have to be careful about the sampling we're doing there, right? When we're thinking about the infection rate, because it's changed from how we test things a year ago. And there's also a bunch of people doing home testing, and that data doesn't get reported anyplace. Mm-hmm. So, I don't understand enough about statistics and all that kind of stuff to think about it, but it sort of makes me say that the infection rate is not the only thing we should look at. And it seems like, at least around here, that's all we talk about is the infection rate's going up, the infection rate's going up. And it seems to me that hospitalizations going up would be a good thing to talk about. And then if we want to convince people to get vaccinated, let's take the hospitalizations number and break it into two: those who are vaccinated and those who are not. And no one talks about those numbers. I had to go dig those numbers up, right? What I quoted to you a little earlier. I had to go figure that out on my own. And it seems to me, same thing with, hospitalizations and intensive care. Of the X number of people in intensive care, this percentage are vaxxed, this percentage are not vaxxed. And sort of let the data convince people whether they should get vaccinated or not, as opposed to trying to mandate it, which has been a disaster here, right? It's just not working. The courts are overturning everyone's, all the various different political leaders and their attempts to demand vaccinations are being overturned. However, the ones that have been held up and successful are when corporations do it. So it appears that if a corporation says, look, a condition for employment is you have to be vaxxed, that works. But if the government tries to edict something here, that's been overturned pretty consistently in the courts, or at least held up in the courts to be adjudicated later.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, on the testing side, going back, so it was interesting. We had a huge testing system in place, free and available everywhere. You used your phone, you set up an appointment, or you could do it without an appointment, in and out in 5 minutes. And then in an effort to incentivize people to get vaccinated, they started to shut down the testing centers and say you have to pay if you're not vaccinated, right? And then they decided, they have to make everybody pay. So then people had to pay for a while to get tested, and a bunch of these centers shut down. And then when the numbers went back up again in October, November, they decided that was a bad idea. Now they've reopened the testing centers, and it's free again. So there's lots of people getting tested. We, like, for instance, have a test center right in the parking lot of our university building, right? So the students can go and get tested on their way in, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I think those testing numbers, right, depends on how expensive testing is and how much it's available and how people are getting tested. So I completely agree with you. And we changed over the summer to focus on the hospitalization rates to make decisions on things like that. And so I think our states we're also a decentralized, right? There's a federal government, but the states have a lot of power here in Germany, but they've done a much better job of agreeing and compromising, I think, than in the US. So there really is basically one policy across Germany with some local flavors, some local variations, but it still looks like kind of one government-wide policy, which obviously in the US is not the case. So it's been interesting to watch that, Bela, here.
Yeah. I find it sort of fascinating the way this whole thing has rolled out, right? It's going to be an interesting study for some sociologist. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of papers written on it, 10 years from now, when the dust settles on the whole notion of ways of managing this stuff. And the other thing that I find interesting is that from some perspectives, we want to treat this as a crisis, and we should behave that way. And what I'm trying to say is that when there's a crisis, there's sort of one channel of communication and information, right? Like God forbid, when an airplane crashes, right? The National Transportation Safety Board comes in here in the United States, and they have a press conference every day at a specific time, and they disseminate the information. Nobody else. Nobody else is going on, late night TV, or no one else is going on other news channels and saying things. It's one specific way of disseminating information, and it's consistent, and it's thought through. And I think one of our challenges has been, we had some of that, in the earlier days of it. We certainly had it here in New York State with former Governor Cuomo. Every day at noon he had a press conference, and it was good. You may agree or disagree with what he said and how he did it, but my point is there was one source of information for what was going on in New York State, and we haven't done that in this country, and I think we're suffering from that because we have various different federal level organizations disseminating information, and then we have all the states disseminating information, and it's not surprising people are confused. They don't know what to do, right? And then plus, of course, you have all the media outlets and all of the, social media stuff that goes on as well. And it's just it's a confusing world right now, I think. And because you hear so many different things. It's like, okay, this Omicron thing is bad. Oh, no, it's nothing to worry about. It's bad. It's nothing to worry about. Oh, my God, we're shutting the borders. No, don't shut the border. It's just like that's not good in a crisis. If you're trying to manage a crisis, that's not a good way to do it. If you're debating about, whether we should paint the sidewalk red or whether we should paint the sidewalk blue, that's fine. but if it's an important decision where you're trying to get and change people's behavior or get people to behave a certain way, it's not a good way of doing it. I don't think.
Agreed. Agreed. I mean, in any organization, the government is an organization, for better or for worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Clear communication is critical. And yeah, it's the sad thing about it is how many people, I mean, and again, people don't believe the numbers of deaths, but at least the fairly direct connections that I've had between, friends and colleagues that have lost relatives to this unnecessarily because they weren't immunized and things like this, this is where the real loss happens.
Right.
We look at it, we can absolutely, the economic impacts are, and some sectors devastating, and that must be considered. But I just can't imagine what it feels like. I mean, I know what it's like to lose a parent, but I know one of my friends has lost a parent who didn't want to get vaccinated, and that's just a tremendous loss for a family. So we can look at it at the big high level, like what we're doing, and I think it's really important to have these discussions and these debates. But we also have to remember the household by household, all the victims of this. It's sad, and it's going to take a long time to deal with this, right? Hopefully we can get a handle on the public health part, right? But I think the emotional stress of all of this is a whole nother story that we could talk about for hours.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
amazing.
Well, all right. Hey, should we get into the podcast?
Yeah.
Well, that's it for that episode. I hope you enjoyed our pre-podcast discussion. As usual, we always appreciate your comments and suggestions. You can reach us at bela.and.mike@gmail.com. Take care and see you next time.